Rosendahl of the Transportation Committee that we're holding a meeting today on. And Mr. Parks is in a real fast hurry, so I'd like to move as quickly as I can. Let's just start with Glenn Bailey with the general comment, please. And I know you have a couple of other cards pulled, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Rosendahl, committee members. I haven't been to the Transportation Committee recently, but I did want to bring to your attention something that I think is a problem in the city. Shortly after bicycle lanes were installed on Reseda Boulevard after Labor Day, weekend after Labor Day, within 2 weeks, the community found that the Film LA had issued permits for 2 filming, which I'm all for, but they don't recognize the bicycle lanes as being lanes of travel. And they have allowed then, by their permit and by the LAPD officers who were there, who I spoke with and viewed the permit, to have the large trailers parked and on top of the bike lane. The other facilities they had coned off. And this particular stretch, as many stretches in the city of LA, are where there's the bicycle lane and the adjacent lane for travel are not shareable. So if you take the lane in such an instance, which is what I had to do, you're competing with the moving vehicles, which, you know, they rightfully expect. Now if there's a bicycle lane, the cyclist should be in the bicycle lane. So I think there's a disconnect in the city between the Film LA office, which is issuing these permits and basically sanctioning, per the LAPD, sanctioning the ability of these instances. And this is a multi-day shoot, all day long, well into the evening, till 10 o'clock at night. So basically, in this stretch on a major boulevard in the backbone, one of the backbone streets of the bicycle plan, this important link leading up to the second largest university in the city was not usable safely by cyclists. So I'm asking that you and your staff have a discussion with Film LA and make sure that they're complying with the spirit and intent, if not the letter of the law, of the bicycle plan, and not interfere, and to treat bicycle lanes as lanes of traffic as the law provides and as other jurisdictions do. Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. Is the director of the department here? Where is he? Jaime? Okay. I think it's an excellent suggestion, and there should be that constant cooperation and coordination between both departments on that going forward. We have the 2 assistant general managers in the room. Okay. I just wanted you to hear that public comment card. Jaime, come on up to the mic for a quick second. I just want you to hear this real quickly. Usually we're not supposed to respond to public comment, but this was a no-brainer. When we put in our bicycle lanes and we do bicycling, the Film LA needs to interact with you guys, because on some streets they just ignore the cyclists, and the cyclists are impaired by it. And I'd like you offline to meet with Mr. Bailey, because he just discussed it with us in public, but more importantly, get with the head of that department, Film LA, and get a protocol worked out if we need to do an MOU, if we need to do something that carries out what he says. I want to do it.
Okay, understood.
All right, thank you very much for that, and I appreciate your comment on that. Okay, what we'd like to do, because we have a quorum here, is move as quickly as we can. And I'm going to save item 5 for one more second, because I do want to get through other items here. Mr. Bailey pulled a card for item number 2. To report, could we quickly say what that is, Maria?
Item number 2 is a DOT report relative to the use of bicycles on city sidewalks pursuant to Labange-Garcetti motion.
Okay, before we do that, which he has a card for, item number 1, colleagues, can I have on consent? Could you repeat what item number 1 is?
Item number 1 is a DOT report relative to the 2001 Congestion Management Program Conformance Self-Certification Resolution and Local Development Report.
Okay, colleagues, are we all comfortable with that? Okay. All right. I'm just going to turn this thing off into a softer world. Okay. All right, so we've just approved item number 1 and item number 2. Mr. Bailey, come on up.
Can I hear a staff report before I do public comment?
Sure, if you'd like. Yeah, staff, quickly on item number 2. Sure. No, it's okay. If you...
Michelle Mallory, Department of Transportation. I'm the city's senior bicycle coordinator. In response to Council File 09-0680, Councilmember Labange's motion to address sidewalk riding on bicycling, staff has submitted the report that provides overviews on bicycling on sidewalks in a number of jurisdictions that are considered bike-friendly throughout the nation, including Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco, to see how they deal with sidewalk riding. The city currently has an ordinance that prohibits the riding of sidewalks with a willful and wanton disregard for persons or property, which we take to mean that it's okay to ride on the sidewalk as long as you're not threatening pedestrians and, running into property and things like that. But it's not clear. The council member had a number of concerns about bicyclists riding the wrong direction on sidewalks. We do have reports that LAPD has been citing some folks for riding against traffic on sidewalks. We don't know if that fits the intent of the sidewalk ordinance or not, but it is what it is. State law currently allows municipalities to pass an ordinance to allow for or prohibit bicycling on sidewalks. It deems that authority to the city. So we've made a number of recommendations, and we hope to work with the city attorney to clarify the current ordinance and maybe update it. And our recommendations are that we continue to allow sidewalk riding by bicyclists. There's a need to do so by the elderly and children primarily, especially as we work to build out our network, but that we provide the right-of-way to the pedestrians and require bicyclists to slow to a walking pace around them, that they are required to provide an audible signal when they're passing pedestrians and let them know they're there, that they slow to a walking pace at driveways. Most of the problems with sidewalk riding are driveways and when they enter the intersection, and to slow to a walking pace when they enter the intersection as well. There is also an ordinance 8507 which allows DOT the authority to close business districts to bicycling primarily. I only know of a couple of incidents where this has happened in the city, and generally the sidewalks are so impacted there's not room for bicycle riding at all anyhow, and that's primarily been Hollywood. I welcome your questions.
Okay, thank you. Have a seat over there on the side. We have 3 cards, and Mr. Bailey is one. Is that Alexis? Hi. And Jeff Jacobberger? Is there anybody else for item number 2? Okay. Oh, please. Yeah, sure. Thank you. You can come on and sit.
Oh, this is Apron Parking?
Is that Apron Parking? No. We're on item number 2 on there.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. Okay. All right. We'll go with Mr. Bailey first.
All right. Good afternoon again, council members. First of all, I fully support the use of sidewalks by pedestrians as their safe haven, if you will, and I certainly encourage and recognize that cyclists need to ride safely. In fact, I don't condone bicycle riding on sidewalks. I think it's dangerous as far as folks not expecting a cyclist there, but I need to make some comments. First of all, you need to have Los Angeles Police Department here to speak for themselves regarding what they enforce and how they enforce it. That's number one. Number two, the city already has the authority under state law to prohibit in very dense areas such as Hollywood or the Venice Beach boardwalk, areas that are too congested to safely allow cyclists. But the other thing that you need to, besides what was said, is that there's what I've seen throughout the city, not just in the valley, but throughout the city, is that most of the cyclists on sidewalks are not the children, the elderly, they're the workforce cyclists. And they are riding, I don't know, maybe we should ask them why they're riding on the sidewalks. It may be cultural, it may be because that's what they were used to in the country they may have come from. It may have been their concern with their safety for the lack of facilities on streets. It may be because they don't have lights on their bicycle and they think it's safer, and it probably is safer on the sidewalks, etc. With regards to the process that they're looking at here, I think that there needs to be significant outreach by Department of Transportation in this, and one of the, besides the bicycling community, it needs to be taken to the neighborhood councils. Every community is different. Every community may have challenges, and I don't think that process has actually occurred before. It needs to be a transparent process. Right now, DOT can just declare something without a public process, public hearing, and, you know, that's from several decades ago mentality. And I think that when we go forward, we need to put something in place that's a more open and transparent process. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments, Alex.
Thank you so much. Alexis Lance, Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition. As was mentioned in the original motion in 2009, some individuals, parents and children, are not comfortable or skilled enough to ride on arterial roadways or any roadway, depending on their age or due to vehicular traffic or vehicle speeds, and may desire to ride their bicycles on the sidewalk. Having a clear sidewalk riding policy is a good thing and can better improve the safety of both pedestrians and people bicycling. However, we'd like to know if there's actually been an increase in collisions between pedestrians and people bicycling on the sidewalks. What's motivating the city to re-examine the code at this point in time? And in general, we feel the provisions suggested are fine. However, regarding the concept of banning sidewalk riding in business districts, the California Vehicle Code definition is vague, and it's not necessarily applicable to the city of Los Angeles. It's hard for the average person to know where a business district begins and ends. Therefore, we feel it's mandatory that the city of LA implement signage along any sidewalk that the city may consider banning sidewalk riding on, and that sidewalk riding only be banned where the city has provided on-street bicycle facilities such as bicycle lanes or cycle tracks. That's sort of our main point with it. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments, please.
Jeff Jacoberger, I'm the 10th District Representative to the city's Bicycle Advisory Committee. Just a couple comments, I think, to echo what's previously been said. One problem with prohibiting sidewalk bicycling, particularly in business districts, if you talk about Hollywood, I ride my bike to Hollywood and Highland and to Hollywood and Vine metro stations. I'm comfortable riding on the street. I think most bicyclists are not comfortable riding their bicycles on Hollywood Boulevard. And the city has done, and Metro has done nothing to actually make it safe to ride on street bicycling. Two major transit stations, I'd add Wilshire and Western, which is another one I use. So you shouldn't ban riding on sidewalks when you haven't provided safe alternatives. When I ride around town, very often I'll ride on Olympic a lot, and Olympic's actually a pretty comfortable street to ride on, but I'll often see people riding in the street, and then when you get to Western or Crenshaw or Vermont, bicyclists go up on the sidewalk because we have not provided safe ways for bicyclists to get through those major intersections. And so the fact that we're even having this conversation is really an indictment of the city for its failure to provide adequate on-street bicycling facilities for bicyclists of all skill levels. Thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate the three of you very much for your comments. Staff, I'm going to put some questions into the record that are part of the ordinance. Then we will go to item number 5 in respect to Mr. Parks here. There are a couple of more items I'd like to see in this ordinance that you take into consideration. Number 1, a provision that allows bicycles to ride on the sidewalk even in banned districts in cases where they are avoiding a traffic hazard in the immediate area, is one. Second one is provide clearer definitions on pedestrian and business districts and establish clear guidelines as how, when, and why bicycling would be prohibited on the sidewalks. And the third one I have is if we're going to go through this exercise, we need to develop a means of educating the public, which was part of what you heard from comments from the question. And so what I'm going to ask is, how quickly do you think the city attorney can prepare a draft ordinance? Do you have any sensing on that?
I can't speak for the city attorney. I'm looking at him now.
I know. Would you like to comment on that?
Early next year.
Early next year? Okay. So what we're suggesting at this point, at least I will, but I do want my colleagues to comment on it, is that we approve the department's recommendations to revise the language, but still it's a work in progress. I would like you very much to take a meeting with the 3 cyclists that showed up here today and take their input within the consideration of what you'll bring back to committee. Okay? That's something we can work with there. Mr. Koretz.
Yeah, I'm probably a good example of someone who would be cycling on a sidewalk. I don't do it that often because I'm not that comfortable cycling on a sidewalk either with a lot of pedestrians. I don't mind getting on a bicycle. I did the California AIDS ride, which is over 500 miles, but it's very safe. You are there by yourself, and every inch of that is kept separate from traffic. If I knew what the regulations were and that it was okay to drive on the sidewalk, I'd probably do it more. Now, I'm picturing myself, if I were able to drive to work on a bicycle, would I really take 3.5, 4 hours to get there at a pace of 3 miles an hour on the sidewalk? Have we ever actually looked at the speed that people use on the sidewalks? I suspect you will not find a single sidewalk rider that ever rides as slow as 3 miles an hour, unless they actually were on a commercial street so heavily trafficked that we would ban them. So I think we might want to pick a speed that actually is practical so that every single bicycle rider on a sidewalk won't be in violation. And we do this on the streets with cars. We say, okay, if everyone's going 40 miles an hour, we're not going to mark it at 20. So I think we should actually pay a little more attention to the real pace and pick a reasonable number so people aren't going by 20 miles an hour, which is, I think, what we're getting at.
I should probably clarify that bullet. There should probably be some additional language that says 3 miles an hour in the presence of pedestrians. I don't think we expect that every bicyclist is going to ride 3 miles an hour at all times, but 3 miles an hour is considered standard maximum walking pace for pedestrians, so we should probably just clean up that language as a starting place.
Well, yeah, and I don't know how easily you define it, because if there's one full block and there's one pedestrian nowhere near you, I don't really expect you to go down to 3 miles an hour, and again, you'll have lots of violations. I'm not sure, on the other hand, that I would only ban bicycle riding on crowded sidewalks if we've given an alternative, because if we're actually going to cause some safety problems, and I know we're not moving fast enough to create an alternative in every case. So I would think that's a little bit extreme, but we should at least try to provide alternatives as quickly as we can if we're identifying sections where it's banned. What are we thinking of as the penalties for violations?
I actually don't have any concept about that. We'd have to talk to LAPD and the city attorney's office to determine what's reasonable.
Yes, I think we would want to make it reasonable, especially for first violators. I know we're looking at an ACE program and heavier hits for other things, but I want to be sure we're not doing something like a $250 first ticket.
Agreed.
It's got to be.
Agreed.
It's got to be reasonable and inappropriate,
Yeah.
and appropriate. And how does this mesh with our anti-harassment stuff that we've done? Does this in any way conflict?
It does not. The anti-harassment essentially is to give cyclists an avenue for retribution for motorists who harass them on the roadways. What we're saying with this ordinance is we're going to clarify bicycling on the sidewalk until we can get a network in place, because we're really clear we don't have a bicycling network right now. So we need to be able to do that and deal with the complaints we have from pedestrians about bicyclists who are going very fast in the area, while at the same time providing for cyclists while we don't have that network.
Thank you.
Let me just ask a couple of questions. If I understand it, we're allowing bicycles and skateboards to be on the sidewalk as long as they don't endanger the pedestrian.
The current code, yes.
Okay. It doesn't preclude them from riding in the street.
Correct.
Okay. The thing I have a concern about, being that sidewalks are the only place that people can walk, they can't walk in the street, I'd hope we are as sensitive as possible as to how slow a bicycle should be moving on that right-of-way.
I agree.
Because they have the option of going in the street if they choose. Mm-hmm. But being that people can't go in the street, and you have people and baby carriages and elderly, and plus you have sidewalks that are in disrepair, I would hope that we would have the minimum speed so that it would encourage them to go into the street and not commingle with pedestrians unnecessarily.
Okay.
I think, as you can see, both my colleagues and myself with some questions, plus the community folks gave some questions. So it's a work in progress at this point. Take it under consideration, take a meeting with them, and do tell the LAPD to look at what we're drafting and to be prepared to come to the meeting as well when we bring it before our committee again. Okay? Can we move forward with that, colleagues, on that
Sure.
note? Okay. I'm just going to do quickly two on consent, item number 4 on the regular agenda, and item number 1 on the special agenda. Could you read them real quickly? There seems to be no controversy on either one.
Item number 4 is a CAO report relative to extending for 1 year, a month-to-month basis, the DOT contract with Veolia Transportation for the provision of the downtown dash services.
Okay. Colleagues, are we okay on moving forward with that? Okay, so moved.
And then item 1 on the special agenda is the CAO report relative to amending DOT's contract with Cubic Transportation Systems for the purchase of additional transit access pass smart fare card system equipment.
Okay, any comments on that, colleagues? Can we move forward with that as well? Okay, both have been moved, unanimously approved, so we're done with that. Now we're going to go to item number 5, and I want to thank you, Mr. Parks, for staying through these other 3.
Item number 5 on the regular agenda is a communication from the city attorney and ordinance relative to granting to Westpac Pipelines a common carrier pipeline franchise in Los Angeles.
Okay, my plan here is to have staff come up and explain everything, and my colleagues, if they have any questions to speak, if there's no dissenting cards on this, we'll ask for people to quickly say their name for the record, and then we'll take a vote at that point afterwards. One of the reasons we brought it back to committee was life moves so fast around here that when things get to the full council, sometimes our memories are not with us at that particular moment. And more importantly, on this issue, there were public comment cards that did raise some issues, and I felt we should at least air it one more time in committee. So I ask you to give a quick hit on what the story is, and we'll see where we can go from there. Go for it.
Good afternoon, council members. Farhad Zaltash from Department of Transportation. What you had before you last Friday in City Council was the final step, the award of the franchise for a pipeline facility to Westpac Westpac Pipeline LAX LLC. This project's EIR was approved in August of 2011. Prior to that, the matter came before this committee, your committee, in July of 2011. There were comments in opposition to the project by some community members. There were responses from staff to those comments, and at the time you recommended the recertification and approval of the EIR document. A little bit of background on this project. This application for this project was originally submitted to the city in 2007. The original EIR was approved in 2009, and the franchise was granted by the City Council. However, there was a lawsuit filed against the city by City of Gardena due to the fact that City of Gardena did not and does not like this pipeline to go through its jurisdiction. So the matter was referred to court. The court reviewed that and made a ruling which was that the EIR process and documents by the city were adequate in all areas except one, which was the analysis of alternatives. So the city took the EIR back, modified it, addressed the court's ruling, basically providing additional analysis of the alternatives, and as part of that process, provided a period for public comments. Those public comments were received by the city, and responses were made, and everything was documented in the new EIR document. So basically, the city complied with the court's ruling in redoing the EIR document, and it came before the City Council and got approved in 2011. The project, just a very, very short description of the project. It involves for an updated and consolidated way of bringing jet fuel to LAX and other airports in Southern California. The first phase 1 of the project involves the installation of a 16-inch pipeline from Vopak terminal in Wilmington part of the city to Kinder Morgan's Watson pump station. It's 6.5 miles. 1.5 miles is in city's jurisdiction, and the rest is in city of Carson. Phase 2 of the project is 17.5 miles and connects the Kinder Morgan's facility to a storage tank in LAX property. It's 17.5 miles, and there are other jurisdictions, city of Gardena, city of Hawthorne, and LA County. As part of this project, a pumping station will be constructed at the Vopak terminal. A transfer facility will be built at the Kinder Morgan's facility, as well as a receiving station at the storage tank in LAX. So I need to emphasize that with your instructions, we came back out of courtesy for the public comments. However, the city family departments have complied with all the CEQA requirements and guidelines to the satisfaction of the court. And that process involved a definite period for public comments, which is currently closed. But the staff is here. Next to me is Mr. Bruce Lacka, our city's consultant, as well as Mr. William Jones from Department of Public Works. And if there are any comments about environmental...
All of the communities along the route sign off on this as well?
No, not all of them. Definitely city of Gardena was in opposition to the project, and the folks who showed up last time at City Council last Friday are in opposition to the project. But there were others who have been in support of the project.
Gardena was the one that sued us?
Gardena sued us,
Okay,
but
what was the outcome of the lawsuit?
the outcome of the lawsuit was that we had to take the document back and do additional analysis of the alternatives, which we did, and the court is happy at this point, and everything has been satisfied by the court.
Are we satisfied there are issues, they're still dissatisfied about the project?
Gardena is, but the court is...
No, I'm saying, but that's what I want to clarify. We've satisfied their issues based on the court direction.
No, we have not.
We've not...
But basically, what happened was we provided additional analysis which showed the proposed route that the EIR is recommending is the best route. And part of it will go through
Did the
city
court
of
buy off on
Gardena.
that?
I'm sorry?
Did the court buy off on the
Yes.
final product?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Gardena is still unhappy?
They haven't mentioned, they haven't shown up as part of the second round, but we haven't had any other communications from
The
them.
EIR is final.
Yes, it has been
And
approved.
all we're doing today is setting up the franchise fee account?
Basically, you are awarding the franchise to Westpac.
Okay, all right.
Any other questions, Mr. Parks?
No, I just want to vote on it for the 10th time.
I don't have any questions. My staff tells me I voted in favor of this 7 times so far. So I suspect I will remain consistent on this issue.
Okay, and those in favor of it in the room, stand up for a second who have filled out cards, and those who haven't. Those in the room that have a different point of view, stand up, the others sit down. Okay, unless there's a desire by Mr. Parks to have public comment?
No, I've heard it.
Okay, do we have a motion to move forward?
Second.
Okay, unanimous, we're moving forward with it. Thank you very much. Be prepared to come before council. Can we do this next Wednesday?
The clerk is looking at scheduling it next week. We'll see.
If Wednesday works for the council member, yes, it
Wednesday
does.
works,
Sure.
Wednesday. Next Wednesday, okay? Be prepared in case colleagues have questions of any kind to get up and explain it, okay? Thank you all very much. Thank you, everybody in the room who came in for this. Appreciate it very much. Okay. All right, now that leaves us, if I'm not mistaken, with item number 3 and item number 2 in the special agenda.
Right. So
Okay.
item,
So let's go with item number 3.
okay. Item number 3 is a DOT report relative to the study of the shared lane marking Sharrows for riders of bicycles at various trial locations throughout the city.
Okay, Alexis and Glenn, be prepared to get up for that. We'll hear the report and certainly appreciate your comments reacting to it.
Michelle Maury, Department of Transportation, Senior Bicycle Coordinator. So what we're doing is coming back to you with the final results of the report. They're all called out in the study. We have a short video that'll show you, essentially before and after changes in the roadway and how motorists reacted to the bicyclists before and then how motorists reacted to the bicyclists after. But the general parameters of the study were based on a council motion by Councilmember Garcetti, who asked us to look at installing Sharrows at a number of locations. Fountain was one of those locations and was included in the study. We have general parameters from the state as to how a Sharrow can be installed. The technical name is shared lane marking. It's commonly known as the Sharrow. But we looked at a number of locations throughout the city to fit our parameters. We ended up with Fountain, Adams, West Home, Fourth, Abbott, Kinney, and Reseda. We looked at 6 different locations, so they would essentially have a variety of on-street applications, and we would see how the Sharrow worked best in those applications. Why don't we go ahead and start this, and I'll walk you through. But let me explain that there was a before and after, and the way that this worked is we had 2 LADOT vans on the roadway. We essentially parked them. We tried to a video camera in each van, and the idea was to be somewhat surreptitious about this so motorists didn't recognize us out there and know we were videotaping. We would send cyclists at 12 miles an hour in the before study at 12 miles an hour, 12 feet from the curb faces, which is where we intended to center the Sharrow, and have them ride through what we called the zone of interaction. And we would see how motorists behaved before, and then once we put the Sharrow in, how they behaved after. But the video will walk you through this.
Very interesting.
Glenn,
Can you see that?
I should say that we had funding from SCAG on this, and the LACDC was our partner. So essentially, this is telling us this is what happened before, and these are kind of these categories.
Ooh. That's why I don't ride.
Me too.
Yeah.
You have to ride where Sharrows are. It's better now.
See, that poor guy's going to get doored.
Ooh.
Or lady.
Are these random cyclists or are these people
No.
that we put there?
The cyclists were volunteers from the LACDC or staff. They were our control group.
That's a risky volunteer, yeah. I was gonna say.
And I should mention we have liability waivers on everybody, but anyhow.
Man, look at that. Jeez.
They push you right off. They're honking away at you, too. Yep.
Oh.
Pretty scary, yeah. I should mention that's Oliver, who our student professional worker, who was instrumental in helping us develop the study.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's familiar, Alexis? Yeah.
I assume nobody got injured in the production of this.
Oh,
Oh. Jeez.
gotta watch this, Stephen. Could be you.
Oh, nice.
Oh, my God. You get the number of that?
On the road, you'll notice there are some orange dots, and they had those at 11, 12, 13, and 14 feet, and it helped in the analysis and helped to keep the riders where they needed to be. That's the first Sharrow we installed, first one in the city.
That Garcetti?
Yeah, he introduced the motions in his district, that one.
Can we make him paint all of them?
So Michelle, are you basically saying that Sharrow makes the automobile guy a little more sensitive to the cyclists?
We believe so. On page 4 of your report, we show the findings, and they're broken down by the percentage. But we saw, depending on the type of facility, we saw a huge increase in how motorists treated bicyclists. On Fountain in particular, we saw a 27.6% change in overall passing distance. So we didn't see a marked change on Reseda, but we pretty much know we want to use these on smaller streets. Fountain is the secondary highway. Adams is a secondary highway. They're both very small streets that are carrying high volumes of traffic, so we know this is where we want to focus our efforts. As you may or may not know, on the weekend of August 1st and 2nd, the city installed 20.61 miles of Sharrows. So we made a significant investment in the marking now. Put 797 of them down on the roadway. We will use them to enhance our bicycle-friendly streets. We'll use them as an interim measure as we're trying to get bicycle lanes in, but we know they work, and we're going to come forward and use more.
Okay, great. Great. Well, we'll just sit to the side there, and we're going to go through the cards. I'm curious what the cyclists have to say about this. Come on up, Alexis. Come on up, Glenn. Come on up, Jeff. Come on up, Stephen.
Thank you for your time again.
My pleasure.
Sorry. In
Name for
general,
the record.
Oh, okay. Alexis Lance, Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition. In general, we're really pleased to see the city moving forward with implementing Sharrows on our streets. But we do want to ensure that a broad public education campaign is done to inform both motorists and the bicycling public what Sharrows are. As we've seen, they do definitely help on the roadway, but there's more that can be done. And we continue to do outreach in the areas where we're working and through our City of Lights program. Additionally, we do have some concerns. A number of streets where Sharrows have recently been implemented were identified as streets for bicycle lanes in the recently adopted bike plan. While we appreciate staff aggressively moving forward with bike plan implementation, we want to make sure that they are moving forward with what was specified in the plan. The Sharrows that have been recently implemented on those bike lane streets should not be considered as meeting the 40 miles a year target of the 5-year implementation plan, as they're not complete projects. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Repeat that last sentence again.
So the Sharrows that have been implemented on streets that were identified as bike lane streets in the plan should not be considered as meeting that 40 miles of bikeways per year goal of the 5-year implementation plan, since they're not yet complete projects.
Very good. Appreciate that. Please, Glenn.
Glenn Bailey. I'm Vice Chair of the City of Los Angeles Bicycle Advisory Committee. I do need to say that I am speaking as an individual because the Bicycle Advisory Committee has not had a meeting since this report came out, so we haven't reviewed and weighed in on it yet. But I have followed the Sharrow. First of all, let me commend the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition Council President Garcetti for jump-starting this effort. I know it was languishing for quite a long time to get the first Sharrows in the city. Having said that, I think there are some issues that we need to look at. I think Alexis touched on one of them that is of concern. It's very sensitive, I think, to the nature of the street. So what worked on Fountain, for example, in Hollywood, didn't seem to work on Reseda Boulevard in Reseda. Unless it's a typo, if you look at the report there, it indicates that the passing distance was actually less on Reseda Boulevard. The other thing, one of the instances that we had was that we had LAPD officers telling cyclists move to the right, even though they were riding right on the Sharrows. When I went to the CPAB meeting for that particular police division, the captain didn't know what a Sharrow was. And so I think we do have and I've since communicated that with higher-ups in LAPD, so we're working on the education process, but we can't have a new pavement marking without the whole city family knowing what the significance of it is, obviously including LAPD, but everyone else. And the last thing is these last installations that were done, even though they may have been in the bike plan, there was, just as a member of the BAC, as a neighborhood council board member, I never was informed that, hey, we're planning to put these in next week, 2 weeks. So we had some folks, stakeholders that said, hey, why weren't we notified these were put in? And I think we could do a better job of communicating that in advance before the installation. Give people a couple weeks' notice. Yes, they may be in the plan, or yes, they may be interim before a formal bike lane gets put in, but give the people the courtesy of knowing that we're planning to put these in a few weeks. Thank you.
When you mentioned the LAPD, you went to the higher-ups, and were they responsive then, after the captain didn't know?
Yes, Jeff and I represent the BAC on the LAPD Bicycle Task Force with Commander Villegas, who recently got promoted. And this dialogue did occur at that level. That's part of operations where they actually train the 10,000 officers. The issue is the training getting out to all the officers that are out in the field. So that's an ongoing issue with all things bicycle. But I think my recommendation to LAPD at the time when we only had 6 Sharrow installations was to make sure that we specifically communicated with those police divisions where the Sharrows are being located. Now we have a whole bunch more Sharrows probably in virtually every division. So, that's going to be more of an effort. So, but it should be done.
Okay,
because
I totally agree with you. Please make sure that we do an official response to LAPD of where all the Sharrows are, what neighborhoods they're in, so that everybody is drilled down into the level of the particular police area, and they're all familiar with this. I appreciate that. Please.
Jeff Jacoberger with the Bicycle Advisory Committee, but speaking on my own behalf. I think one thing to keep in mind as elected officials and our appointed officials are trying to explain Sharrows to folks is, for the most part, these are put on existing bike routes. All it is a different kind of sign on an existing bike facility. If you look at historical pictures, the way a stop sign looks, the way a traffic light looks, has changed over time. And all that this does is really changing the signage for existing bike routes. It's not a big deal, and I think y'all, when you're explaining it to your constituents, shouldn't treat it like a big deal, because all it is just changing signage on existing facilities for the most part. I would echo what Alexis said from the LACBC. I mean, I certainly welcome the addition of Sharrows, but the LA Bike Plan, particularly on bike-friendly streets, calls for Sharrows plus other things to be counted as miles under the bike plan. So we welcome it, but they don't count as miles under the bike plan.
Gotcha.
And then finally, just on my...
What's your definition of miles of bike plan? What should they have?
Well, I mean, I think for a bike-friendly street, I mean, I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it calls for Sharrows and at least 1 or 2 other treatments in addition to Sharrows, additional traffic calming measures. And so, I mean, Sharrows are great, they're halfway there, but they're not, a completion of what the bike plan calls for.
Make sure, Michelle, that you answer that question about what we mean by making it, and how do we deal with the 40 miles a year on that one? Okay.
And then just on as a personal thing, I ride on Vine on occasion, which is a really
You ride on what?
on Vine Street, which was a pretty hostile street. And my experience riding on Vine since then is that the Sharrows actually have made a difference. And, there's still, when I ride up Vine Street, I now deal with one hostile driver instead of, 6 or 7. So.
Great.
Thank you.
Appreciate that very much. Stephen?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk about Sharrows here at the Transportation Committee. Just have a couple of concerns. The first one is location, and some of the Sharrows that I discover are on streets that really have no need for a Sharrow, like Van Ness, just south of Sunset. No traffic, no center line, no lane markings. It's just a really quiet street that hits Sunset and then dead ends because of the way the 101 cuts through above Sunset. So in other words, we're pumping mileage and counting Sharrows and putting them where they fit, not where they're needed. The second thing is, what's that?
What street are you talking about?
Well, you can take Van Ness, south of Sunset.
Van Ness.
You could look at Arden outside Jack Humphreyville's house, which was perhaps a fun way of getting him to write for City Watch. But that's another quiet street with absolutely no need for a Sharrow. When you consider the streets that need them are the ones that need to resolve conflict or manage traffic congestion and help folks coexist, cooperate, communicate, negotiate, but share some pretty limited space. Arden is so quiet you could literally walk down the center and you wouldn't encounter traffic, and Van Ness the same thing. Anyway, so it seems like we're pumping mileage by putting Sharrows down, not where they're needed, but where they fit. The second thing is, I believe that Sharrows should be measured from the center line of the street, not from the curb face. And so as the width of a street varies, and they do all over the city, Sharrows shouldn't meander based on the varying width of the street. On paper, they're all the regulation size, but in reality, we've got some really wide streets, for example, out on the east side, et cetera. And in LA, we've got some really narrow streets, and Sharrows should be positioned off the center line, just like the traffic lanes are, the number 1, the number 2, et cetera. Parking, of course, is as far to the right as possible. But the Sharrows should be measured in relation to the center line. The third thing is, I would ask for a recommendation of a 13-foot minimum from the curb face, which is enough space for an 8-foot parking stall and a 5-foot distance, the door zone from a car. The current standard's 12. Most importantly, Sharrows are a shared lane marking, and the thing to remember is that on a lane that's less than 14 foot wide, the proper way to share is with one in front of the other. And some of these Sharrows are positioned on non-shareable or sub-14-foot lanes in such a way that it invites unsafe sharing of motorists and cyclists. And so, in a sub-14, it should actually be in lane control position as opposed to the right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Yes, and Michelle, come on up and react to the comments from the public, especially how did you determine which streets, what criteria did you go through, and was there cyclists, community folks in the room helping us figure this out, and anything else you heard from the questions from the group?
On page 4 of your report, page 4 and 5, there are a list of the 20 miles that went in the ground. So there are a list of all the streets and the limits of the street from where to where that the Sharrows went in. All of these locations were selected because they were either on the new bicycle plan, it's a bicycle-friendly street, or a bicycle lane that we're not going to be able to get to really quickly, or in the case of Van Ness, that's a gap closure around Fountain. We have, as you will recall, Fountain, maybe some of you know, some of it doesn't, it dead ends in right into a middle school. So this actually gets you around the middle school. It's kind of used as wayfinding in that scenario, but it completes the Fountain link. All of these were posted on our website, on the bike blog for weeks before they were installed. The list actually changed and was a little flexible, morphed a little bit over time until the final variation came out, but there was a lot of information, at least to the bicycling community, up on the web. We are still working on our outreach issues. We are a very small staff covering a very large city attempting to do greater outreach, but we're continuing to refine our process and are working with the mayor's office on how we will continue to do outreach on the projects. LAPD was aware of the efforts we were making on the Sharrow with the study, at least our liaison. Again, it's a very big city and a very big department, and we'll make an effort to get a memo from our general manager to the chief so he knows exactly where they're installed at this point, so they know what it is. And we'll also include some guidance from the manual as to how they're installed and a copy of the report and whatnot. Let's see, what else? We are endeavoring to install 40 miles of bikeways per year, not necessarily bike lanes, but bikeways. For this year, that may include part of the Sharrow package. We're trying to get as many lanes on the ground as we possibly can. We're encountering some resistance in both of your council districts from some council members or from members of the public. We have a number of projects that we could put on.
What kind of resistance are you getting from these?
I had a meeting this morning from a business improvement district that doesn't want to see us put in a bicycle lane that we believe we could do relatively easily. We still have to remove a travel lane, but we believe the traffic volumes support that it's not a project that would have to go on the EIR. We have
Why are they taking that position?
There is concern that the project will create congestion because we would remove the travel lane. We have, on that particular project, we've looked at the volumes, the number of cars that are using the roadway at the peak of the AM and the peak of the PM peak. And our traffic engineers believe it doesn't meet the threshold. We would not have to go through an EIR, but there still is concern in the community. So we'll have to continue to outreach and work with this. Most of these folks are feeling that they were blindsided, that they weren't aware of the bicycle plan, so we're going to have to continue to work with them as we build this process. But, you know, we're a city in transition. This is something new for the city, and we're to the point that what we're doing is the difficult stuff. We need some leadership from council to help us do this.
I'd be happy with anyone that are in my district to have my staff sit with you and be happy to meet with those constituents.
Well, we're going to go forward and install Maine, the road diet on Maine that will continue from Santa Monica. So that'll be the first one that goes in your district.
Mm-hmm. And make sure you talk to the Google people.
We have already. They're supportive, yeah.
Okay, because I was just with them last week. Public relations campaign. First of all, I have some questions too for the record, but public relations campaign. How about getting Channel 35 to do a spot explaining what it is?
Sure, we can do that.
I also think you should do an outreach to the broadcast signals in this town as a public service. They might do a special on what a Sharrow is. They might have a thing of it. They might do some interviews. It would certainly be a good news story for them. And it would also be a public service announcement that maybe we could create in those stations as a public service, could put it on. The broader the awareness of what a Sharrow is, the happier, obviously, everybody will feel about it. And what people don't understand is that alerts the driver in the car that the cyclist has a right too, you know, and don't push him off the lane. Somebody has to explain, which I learned really through that Mandeville Canyon situation, that a bicyclist has rights like as if it was an automobile. I never realized that. I thought you had to push all the way to the right. And that was what life was, and so that was a learning experience. And I think most of the people out there don't understand the rules of the road, nor the cyclists' rights, and I think you should actually put some stuff out on cyclist rights, work with the cycling community, and help them create the right verbiage and lines that we could use. I think it's a very healthy interaction between the department and the community. And in that particular incident where you mentioned there might have been some business improvement district that had an issue, you should contact our cyclists who are part of your city committee and let them get the cyclists in that neighborhood to also talk to these people and say, hey, we got rights too, just as a PR thing. But I would like to see a PR plan come back to committee with how we're going to get the word out, what methods do we need, what other support can I give, and take a meeting with some of the folks that just spoke and get their input. But here are some questions for the record. One of the concerns I've heard is the Sharrows shouldn't be a supplement for bike lanes. How do you respond to that?
They're not a supplement per se. In some cases, they will be the only thing we're able to do in certain scenarios. If you have a 2-lane road that doesn't have enough width to add a bicycle lane, they might be the only tool that we have. So a Sharrow would solve that function. We are using it in some cases as an interim measure. we can't get a bicycle lane in there. It's a project that might have to go through an EIR, or it's a project that might not be within the 5-year plan. It gets the Sharrows a temporary measure for future bike lanes, but we would not put them in
It's not part
together.
of the 40 miles a year of real bike lanes.
We are intending to count that as a part of the 40 miles a year. They are a treatment that provides for better bicycling in the city.
So then, the cyclists are right when they say that this might be, in their mind, in lieu of a bike part of the 40 miles. You're saying, in some cases, this is the only way a road can be bicycle-friendly.
This year, it may be the only treatment we're able to do within certain corridors. We are attempting to get 40 miles of bicycle lanes in. It's pretty clear we probably won't get 40 miles of bicycle lanes in, but we will get 40 miles of bikeways. We had hoped, there are a number of projects we had hoped to move forward that we're not getting very good community support on.
When you talk about community support, how do you go about getting community support?
In the case of one project, we've been meeting with the HOAs, the neighborhood councils, but as we were going through the process, there's a general fear of what it might bring to a certain community, and before we're able to meet with all the groups, the process gets somewhat hijacked, and there's concerns that we will cause additional congestion or a cut through traffic in the neighborhoods, when what the project would actually do is the inverse.
My suggestion on that is take advantage of the cyclist community. They're down here today. They come down. They're involved in this, and bring them into your inner circle of discussion so that they can help get that message. There's nothing better than like you take Alexis over there to walk in a room with a bunch of people and explain how it works. She'll have a bigger impact on it than I would.
We have invited them, and they have been at the table with us.
In many opportunities, we have been, but I think at the same time, there is a need for the political leadership to be there too, because the cycling community is coming forward for a lot of these projects, and the DOT is doing the best they can, the capabilities they have, but the political leadership is really needed for a lot of these projects.
Well, I'll certainly be happy from my perspective. Anything in my district where you say you need my leadership on it, Paul, you better know about it, and if I need to physically get involved, I will, because I believe in this with passion, that it needs to be done. So you'll have.
And I'll make that same offer. It doesn't mean that.
Sorry?
I'll make that same offer too. It doesn't mean that I will agree with you 100% of the time either. But where I can help move the community, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. Okay, so you got two of us who are really with it. Now, here's question number 2. When do we anticipate that the bicycle may use full lane signs to be approved and used here in California?
We anticipate that there are a number of manuals that dictate kind of what we do and how we do and help protect the city from liability. The Caltrans Highway Design Manual and the Caltrans California Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. That manual regulates signage and striping and traffic control devices, stop signs and whatnot. And the Sharrow is one of those, and so is this sign. It's undergoing revision with Caltrans right now. We expect that they're going to adopt the new document in January, and this sign will be a part of the new package. It's been adopted by the feds already.
Excellent, excellent. Will you be prioritizing the installation of Sharrows on local neighborhood streets, perhaps on streets that are identified for our bicycle-friendly street network?
We will. We actually saw the best results with the study on Fountain, Adams, and West Home. So we expect, and that's our recommendation in the report, that that's where we should prioritize, and that's where we're going to get the best bang for our buck.
Okay, and last is sort of an editorial question. One of my biggest concerns is that everyone is in such a rush to implement the bike plan that we may be sacrificing quality for quantity, and we're going to grow ridership that way. This report is great information to guide our decisions, but I really want to see us become leaders in innovative design over the long run.
You'll recall one of the documents adopted with the bicycle plan was the Technical Design Handbook. Chapter 9 of the Technical Design Handbook includes innovative design. We actually hope to champion more projects like this and move forward. As you may or may not know, we're looking at the application of green thermoplastic on our bike lane installation on First Street and Boyle Heights. That we expect to go in within the next couple of weeks. And we expect to do our first fully green bike lane on Spring Street within the next couple of weeks as well. So we're moving forward. We're a small staff, and it's a big city, but we would like to do more.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, this whole thing is pretty interesting, including that video. It's
I hope
quite-
you were as scared as I was.
It's quite a revelation for me, because that's how I feel when I'm out there riding on a major street. I don't do it very often, and I thought that's because I'm an out-of-practice, rusty cyclist. So it's very revealing to see more accomplished cyclists out there having exactly the same experience. And I just feel like, you know, if I'm out there long enough, you have enough close calls like that, somebody's going to pick me off. So it's very discouraging to me to see what's happening, but to see the results of some of the Sharrows, considering most people don't know what they are. The interesting thing is, I think what you put on the ground there as a sign is intuitive enough that a certain number of people are getting it without any significant PR. But the point is, we aren't doing any significant PR, at least I'm not seeing it. We obviously have to start with the LAPD. There has to be training on that for every officer, so you don't have those mistakes where people are pulled over for riding wrong when they're really doing what the Sharrow tells them they should be doing. But we have to figure out some ways to get better, broader PR out there, even if it's just having every elected official in the city put it on their own personal websites and newsletters that they send out, and just a coordinated effort to get this word out, because I mean, it can be literally a matter of life and death if people start riding in a responsible way where the Sharrows are. It'll clearly make things much safer.
I think it would be great if you would help us publicize through your websites. You know, we do have the study electronically. We can give you that. We can work with you on a message. So if you've got somebody in your staff you want to send to us and we can do that, that would be fabulous. You mostly have some sort of e-blast that you're sending out to your constituents. I think that would be really helpful. We did not want a lot of PR before we did the test. We wanted to know if the marking worked on its own, and we got really good results. So we actually were very specific with the LACBC that we asked them to not do their outreach campaign until we actually got them on the ground and could test them. So we know our limits, but we wanted to make sure the marking worked.
Okay, I think this is great. Do we have another committee meeting prior to the end of the year?
One more.
One, when?
In December 14th.
December 14th. Okay, on December 14th, I'd like you to come back and give us an update on where we are with the PR campaign strategy. It's a no-brainer for me. I could put it on my Facebook. I can put it on everything if I have a little neat package from you that my staff can just flip into the system.
Yeah, at a minimum, we'll both do that.
We'll both do that at the minimum, but we will get all of our colleagues engaged in this as well.
And this is for the Sharrow? This is for the Sharrow? Okay.
If you could give us a how-to, we can all do this on our meeting in December.
Okay.
And then from the committee, I wouldn't mind a motion that should take it to the council so we can do it in a public forum with the council, okay? Where not only this demonstration of what you've done, but a whole explanation of the Sharrow and how it works and so on and so forth, which will be another way. And then the other thing before the 14th is get with Channel 35 and work on a spot that they could create. That would be a challenge for them. They'd have fun doing it. Involve the cyclist community in helping design that spot. And we can get them at the very least to put it on 35 and 36. And then we as a city can certainly present it to the broadcast signals as a public service suggestion.
Okay.
But if you can incorporate all those things and we can play it out on the 14th in this committee, we could get it before the council. Please, Glenn.
Get LAPD to be here on the 14th.
Yes, and involve LAPD between now and the 14th on talking points of where you're at and what they're doing, and have them come with us to this meeting on the 14th.
So, Mr. Chair, if this is an informational report, do you want to continue it to the 14th when then they can present
With
this?
that kind of stuff
Okay.
in it and direction that we can give it.
Okay.
Correct. Anything else on that?
Yeah, just one other point. We passed, obviously, a bicycle lane plan somewhat in a vacuum, in that it really was only people talking about this from a perspective of being interested in advancing it. Everywhere we go, people will largely be unaware of it. And I'm not sure that we did preliminary studies of every area to the point where we can guarantee it'll work. So it may not work on every inch. I think we have to recognize that, and that the people we're dealing with will largely feel surprised. So we have to inform them, we have to make them feel comfortable. If they're very skeptical, we have to prove to them that it won't cause the disruption that they fear it may. In some cases, it may cause disruption, and we may find, as you said, that all we can do is put the Sharrows on because nothing else is practical. So I think we have to realize that all those directions are possible, that we can do most of it, but some of it may actually require quite a bit of hand-holding from the neighborhood or with the neighborhood, and involve, as was said earlier, our elected officials, and particularly on the west side, there's no question where we need to. Mr. Rosendahl and I will get involved to help with that hand-holding, and our offices will as well.
Yeah, and if you get us a script, just a one-pager or two, my deputies will go before each of the 8 neighborhood council and give them an understanding of Sharrow, and because my staff goes before the neighborhood councils every time the neighborhood council meets, and they have an opportunity to bring this up and share it with the community. Some of my councils actually have a transportation subcommittee and a bicycling support system there, like Alex Thompson does it in Mar Vista. We'd be very happy to give that information and instruction out besides on our various ways to relate. Okay, we'll see you on the 14th. Thank you. Make sure LAPD is brought into the loop on it. Okay, great. Appreciate everybody's collaboration on this. I like the fact you can sit there and actually add to a conversation. Even though we have rules and regulations, it's about really getting things done that I appreciate, and I appreciate you all for coming in for this. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we're down to one item, correct?
Yeah, item number 2 on the special agenda is the DOT report relative to the implementing the steps necessary to allow residents to legally park in front of their driveways pursuant to Rosendahl-Corrett's motion.
Okay, I see that there's several cards on it. Stephen, you pulled a card for this one.
Yes, indeed.
Special item number 2. And then there's Barbara is against it. There's Elizabeth McDonald and also Wolfgang Vitt. Let's have a quick staff report on it, and then I'd ask those 4 to come on up and comment on what you heard staff said or anything else you want to add to it. Staff, could you tell us what this item, a special item number 2? Of course, we know about apron parking. Describe what apron parking is as an opening line. People have said to me, what is apron parking? They think they got to put an apron on like a cook.
Good afternoon, council members. Amir Sadati, LADOT. I'm joined here with Tamara Martin, and I did provide just a little diagram. I know it's hard for people that are just listening, but typically what an apron is, it's this paved area that is between the roadway and the sidewalk, entering into a private driveway. So that's how the definition of apron is. It does not include the side slopes here. That would be a driveway approach. So what has happened, I guess, that got us to this point is LAMC section 80.53 does currently say that no person shall stop, stand, or park a vehicle within a parkway. So when we currently have a definition of a parkway that basically says anything between the roadway and the sidewalk is called a parkway, and that's what this area is here, is a parkway. So by definition, it was illegal to park your vehicle in an apron. And until Councilmember Koretz introduced the motion and the council acted on October 12th to ask city attorney to repeal the definition that was found in section 80.00, we were able to then stop that particular enforcement until we are here today to basically provide you some policy options going forward, where we think we've figured out a way with what police powers that you have and the ability to change the LAMC, we can regulate parking both in front of driveways, which was one of your original motions that you were brought up in areas where there was a demand issue with parking and people wanted to come home and they couldn't find parking, as well as the apron issue. So the report before you has a set of recommendations, but the gist of it is simple, as we just talked about it, is by changing the definition of parkway to exclude apron, which there is a definition in another section of the LAMC, then 80.53 allows you to park your vehicle within the apron, both from the point of the roadway wholly up to the sidewalk, as described here in Vehicle 3, as well as in a case where a vehicle extends a little bit beyond the, what's called the edge of the roadway, when there's a parked vehicle there. Obviously, we still cannot allow anybody blocking the sidewalks, so in our report and on page 6 of your report, the same diagram exists. So through giving us or directing the city attorney to amend the ordinance to change the definitions through your police powers, you have the authority to then regulate the parking. And what would be legal if you park fully in your private driveway without blocking the sidewalks, parking within your apron, parking within the apron and standing out where there is a parked vehicle, and where and when necessary, the department will install an edge line as a guide for the parking enforcement to then be able to, and also help the residents to understand what that limit is. And then ultimately, again, going back to your motion, Councilmember Rosendahl, was parking in front of driveways. There is a provision in the California Vehicle Code 22507.2 that through a ordinance and resolution, we would be able to create a permitting system where residents and tenants are then able to park parallel to their driveway, blocking their own driveway through a permit system. And what's before you, and as part of the recommendations, is to direct the Department of Transportation to work with the CAO to find out what that fee would be, what that structure would be, and come back with our rules and guidelines to be able to do that administrative process. But it all starts with directing the city attorney to make those necessary ordinances. Once the ordinances are approved by city council, typically 30 days or so after they're published, they become law. And once they become law, then we were able to go back to enforcing 80.53 and any other applicable laws. But through these policy changes that you're about to approve and the council ultimately approve, we would be able to regulate parking in front of a driveway parallel as well as parking within the aprons as is shown here.
Good, appreciate that very much, that report. We'll have public comment, and take notes if you hear anything in public comment that you feel you must respond to. I know that the people in Playa del Rey that wanted very much to be able to park in front of their driveway, obviously, would be thrilled with a new ordinance like this.
Yeah, and just to finally add, Council, we understand the fiscal realities, so what we have put under the fiscal impact is, at this point, we're going to absorb as much as we can. However, if the direction is to create such a permitting, as I mentioned, there may be some resources or some additional resources that we may have to come back. But our thoughts right now is to automate that, to work with making it an internet system and just, really try to make it an easy step to get, but also not have too much administrative labor involved in it. We're actually working with making it potentially a virtual permit, so it's not a physical permit. It ties it to the license plate, and we have smart technology that can understand that enforcement officers would know if that vehicle is permitted or not permitted. So all of that is part of us going back and figuring out what the permit process would be, what the cost would be, and come back with those information.
So music to my ears. Did you want to ask questions before public comment?
No.
Okay, fine. Thank you so much for that report. Stephen, come on up. Barbara, Elizabeth, and Wolfgang. The reason I didn't say last names, I'm pretty bad on names, so forgive me for that. You know who you are in this. Okay, it looks like Wolfgang has grabbed seat 1, so go for it.
Oh, is that seat 1?
Yeah, well, you know, from my eyes.
Name is Wolfgang Veit. I live in the Northwest Wood Village, and I'm also a founding member of the Northwest Wood Village Residents Association in the mid-'80s. I sent out this illustration there that shows clearly what the situation is in our area, and I want to commend the Department of Transportation and both of the council offices and the excellent work they have done in designing this report, because it accomplishes several things. First of all, it makes the enforcement a lot simpler. It is a clear policy that can be understood easily by anybody involved by redefining the parkway and excluding the driveway. So that is not a parkway. Parkway is named parkway, I understand, to resemble a nature park and not for parking cars. This is a misunderstanding there. And the other thing is, of course, in the North Village, the parkway portion between the sidewalk and the curb is not enough for a car, and has been traditionally with the traditional buildings that if you park a part into the street that is not wider than the parallel parked cars right next to it or in that street and nearby, then it doesn't cause any problems. So that was always done that way. In the illustration, it shows clearly there's sections where the majority of the parking places are like that, and very few are actually parking places. So we're losing tremendous amount of parking places with this interim policy, where we are in an area which is recognized by the city as one of the most heavily parking congested area. We are in a third of a square mile living about 15,000 people. So I want to show my 100% support for the DOT report, and I want to get it done as quickly through City Council and get it done.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth McDonald, and I basically want to second everything Wolfgang said. We started the petition once we started getting ticketed for Apron, and you guys know you've gotten over 700 signatures. It's a big issue. There's, as you're well aware, 3 or 4 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment. They have multiple cars, and there's not enough parking. So we've been parking like this for decades, over 40 years in some streets. It hasn't been a problem, and I think that I really want to thank LA Dot. I think they've done a great job with this report, and they've really taken everything into consideration, and we just want to show our support for this.
Thank you very much. Barbara.
The LA Dot report is interesting.
For your name for the record.
Barbara Ringette, and I'm from Silver Lake. I'm active in the council. This is more than an issue of convenience for people parking. It's also an issue of safety for children, adults, pedestrians, bicyclists, and drivers, everybody. Safety is compromised by this proposal because visual lines of sight are impeded. As more people in rental units park in front of them, the appearance and character of our community is degraded, not only because of these safety issues. They give the appearance of private parking lots while becoming a visual blight. Then aprons of single-family homes become the only turnaround areas and temporary parking for delivery people, taxis, everyone who comes down the street. This is especially a problem on narrow streets and hillside streets where there's no place to pull over if people are parking in front of their driveways and no place to turn around. It also makes legal parking as it is today more difficult because there will be people taking up the spaces inches away in front of their aprons. So who is served by this? Rental agents can charge higher rents based on additional available parking, and the value of those properties will increase. As property owners do not reside on the sites, they experience more income but no detriment. Who is not served? Those on adjacent neighboring properties, especially single-family homes. So the character of the community changes for everyone who lives in the community as well as those who drive through. Where apron parking and parking in front of driveways occurs, permitted or not, the value of those single-family residences and neighboring ones diminishes. 2 additional concerns. This motion encourages greater density by increasing parking alternatives without considering the impact of greater density in our neighborhoods. And then second, city budgeting should take into account litigation arising out of this proposal, safety matters, and reductions of appearance and property values.
Is your street impacted by this?
Yes. I live on Parkman Avenue.
And you see this as an issue for that particular block?
I sure do.
Could we have DOT visit that block and find out what that issue is about? Appreciate that, that you get with her and you go look at it and have a conversation with that. Thank you, ma'am, for that. Stephen
Box, how are you? I can think of no one that believes it's reasonable for people to park on a sidewalk, and in fact, California state law prohibits it. That being said, this brouhaha was completely unnecessary, and it's sad as we look back that the city attorney instructed the department and the department followed the instructions and cited so many people without warning and without a legal foundation. So I commend you for doing as much as you've done to mend those wicked ways, if you will, and I think this is a great report and a great step forward. You bring up some great points that our neighborhoods are very different throughout the city, and it's a shame that the neighborhoods weren't involved all along and that they aren't more involved now in the specific and unique elements. But as it stands, this is an important step toward establishing a baseline of access and accountability for the limited public space that we have. So thank you very much. I think it's important to note a couple of things. Parking lanes vary in the city of LA from 8 to 7 feet. On Sunset Boulevard, they're 7 feet. The cars don't get smaller when you drive through that congested neighborhood. The parking stalls do. So establish a standard for a parking stall in front of someone's driveway. Is it 8 feet? It should be 8 foot citywide. The second thing is that unanswered is what happened to the tickets that were paid. We've acknowledged that they were bad tickets and that we're no longer enforcing the law, but a lot of people have paid tickets over the last 6 months. A lot of people haven't paid tickets over the last 6 months, wondering if indeed it was a reasonable ticket to pay. And what happens to those folks? And some folks have gone to collections, and those $58 tickets they skyrocket the fees, and when it goes to collections, what happens to those folks? Are they still in collections? And fourth is the permitting process. Is it necessary to make it so cumbersome for someone to park in front of their home that it requires a virtual permit? And we're adding another layer of bureaucracy to something that was working. In Mid-City, the article I wrote about City Watch about the family that had been parking in front of their own double-wide driveway for years, it was working, and we're now making it complex. Anyway, thank you very much for your consideration. Thank you very much for this report, and I look forward to this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all four of you for your comments on that. Staff could come back up again for that. First, Mr. Amir, I know you will meet with that lady and you'll check her street out, and your staff is doing that right now, and I appreciate that. First, I just want to start off by thanking staff. I think you thought out of the box. We got very creative. Mr. Kretz and I were pretty upset when our constituents were getting tickets out of the blue, and some of them in their mind had lived in the neighborhood for 20, 30, 40 years, never got a ticket. Some have been there 5 or 6 years, and the neighbor said you can park there. Everybody felt that they weren't violating any rules or regulations or anything else. And I got a lot of calls that weekend when I got slapped around through my constituents for what happened. So I got to thank you very much for hearing what Mr. Kretz obviously deals with UCLA and what I deal with in Venice and in Mar Vista and in the Palisades. And
if I may, I'd like to also acknowledge our General Manager, Jaime de la Vega, his leadership and really pushing the City Attorney's Office and his staff. So I know, he was instrumental in this report, and I want to thank him for that.
And I certainly want to thank him myself personally for this. He was the first call I made was to him, and then I quickly saw his leadership. And Jaime, you've done a great job on this issue here, thinking out of the box, moving along with it, getting an appreciation of the reality of the politics and all of that, and coming up with what I think are creative suggestions. Though we had one constituent that had an issue on her particular block that staff will look to and deal with, but the overall leadership that you showed on this was greatly appreciated and received. I know there's some ambiguities in different areas, I can't say the word right, but I'm looking forward to a site visit up in the Palisades on one particular issue as well. I just have two questions. What is the timeline on the ordinance coming back, and what's the timeline on the report back for the proposed permit program?
I think the first question is to the city attorney that has to draft the ordinance, so I'll let the city attorney respond to that, and I'll be happy to answer the second question.
Great.
Most of it is actually written because we already have
Sure.
the definitions and other sections of the LAMC code.
So you just pull it together and
Right,
work us through it?
right. So I would assume that we'll have it back probably by the end of this month or early next month to
So
get it through.
can we have it for sure before this committee on the 14th?
Yes, that would be.
And then we could get it before the council before the holidays?
Yes, that.
Sort of as a holiday
should not be
gift
problem.
to some folks in their mind? Okay, that answers my questions. No, the second part of
Yeah,
my
so
question.
we have some draft guidelines that we've actually put together, so I think the challenge there is the ability to do this on the internet again. So I think by your December 14th meeting, we should have a set of preliminary guidelines of how to get the permits. We're actually asking in one of the recommendations to work with the CAO to determine what the fee structure could be so that it's going to be a cost recovery program. So I'm hoping that we can do that within the period of your next meeting, which is December 14th.
Great. And could you appreciate Mr. Box's comments about another layer of bureaucracy, another thing of confusion?
Well, this is exactly, I think, in that line. A virtual permit is one where you simply, through internet, provide the information, push a button, pay with your credit card, and you're done. Whereas the current system now, you have to physically go to a location, you have to physically bring information. The business, the hours are 8 to 5. Some people don't get off work until later. So we do want to make sure that this process is less cumbersome, but at the same time that there is some protocols involved so that, other people don't decide just to park. Enforcement needs some guidelines. They always enforce a vehicle. They don't know who the owner of that vehicle is. So it's just a process that we need to follow.
Yeah, I might say, Mr. Box, on that point there as well, relaxed enforcement was the strategy by informal conversations with the homeowner, with the local LAPD. We can't use that as a rule because relaxed enforcement shouldn't exist at all. Enforcing is enforcing, and there are areas in my district where they've had that informal discussion for many years, but then a new traffic cop comes in, doesn't have that relationship, a new LAPD cop doesn't have that relationship, and they do get ticketed. And to avoid even the notion of that, that's one reason. But the other more important reason is no such thing as relaxed enforcement. Either create the law or enforce the law. Otherwise, how do you function as a city in an overall sense of the word? This one came up for me specifically from a Playa del Rey tight neighborhood where they've been wanting to park in front of their driveway for a long time, but there were different policings while others in my district had this informal, and they were upset. How could you even go in this direction? Because of the very reasons I just gave you for that.
Yeah, I pretty much want to say the same thing that Mr. Rosenthal has already said. Although in addition, I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue as chair of the committee, and thank Jaime, the general manager, and thank all the staff for doing a terrific job in thinking out of the box and not approaching this in a slow bureaucratic way, which could have been the way it turned out. This is a real problem that was created by enforcing laws that have been on the books for a long time but never been enforced. This is a great resolution to it. My only question is really on the speed of it. Will coming back with a plan for how we staff the permit part of the program slow this down? Should we do the apron part on a faster track, or is this going to move fast enough that we appropriately could keep the two tied together?
Councilmember, I think it's actually two separate items. So really, as soon as the ordinance that changes the definition of parkway is introduced and it becomes law, that's really your timeline, is the ability to get that in the 30-day timeline that it takes. So that has the apron parking has nothing to do with the permit. The creation of a permit system and then coming up with a way again to make it easier for the public Currently, we don't have a virtual systems. I've talked to a few vendors that are willing to do a pilot with us at no cost for us to see how that would work. We have existing customer service centers currently where the preferential parking is managed out of. But again, we're trying to make it in a way that it's easier and simpler. What we don't simply know is that 5 permits or is that going to be 5,000 permits? And that's unknown to us right now until we, create the system and see what kind of applications we get and what kind of, demand is on us. And that's where we're going to work with the CAO to see what price mechanism, there's a few cities that currently have done that. Long Beach is one, and they have in, I believe, almost 3 years only sold 7 permits. And they have a non-refundable
They created
fee.
a practical process, obviously.
They did actually, and their council went back and directed them to, they had a bureaucratic process, and their council said, go ahead and create a much easier process, and they did. Even with that, they're at 7. But they have a non-refundable fee that's charged up front, whether they get a permit or not. There is some work involved. So again, we are learning from those things. We want to make this as easy, as simple, as cost-effective, but obviously none of this was budgeted in our budget, and we're just trying to be fiscal and work with the CAO to make sure that the department is not put in a hole and your districts, as far as preferential parking and other things, aren't hurt. This is the same group that's doing the car sharing with Zipcar and all the other programs that we're working on. So we'll get back to you, but I think the apron and the permits can go separately. For the apron, it's just a matter of that ordinance, and then for the permit, it's the other ordinance that, again, the city attorney is going to draft that gives us the ability to permit parallel in front of a driveway. But all of those takes a 30-day, or from the time the ordinance is approved, there's a publishing period, then we can start getting applications. But parallel to that, we'll work out all the kinks.
On the apron part, particularly relating to the North Village in Westwood, where we've had to work out the parking arrangement with UCLA for the quarter that will end in a few weeks, and they go back, I believe, around the beginning of January. I don't know the exact date. Do we think we have that implemented timely enough that we won't need to ask UCLA to provide parking permits for one more quarter, or do we think we need to actually do that?
Well, I think we can ask UCLA and get as much as we can. I think it's important to continue to provide those different venues, but I think
It's clearly only while the apron parking isn't working, because their policy would normally not be to provide parking on campus for someone that lives a block or two away. So, do we think we're on target, moving quickly enough to do this by the end of the year?
Yeah, I think, Jaime De La Vega, I think related to the apron parking, if you can implore Mr. Nagel to type up the one-sentence amendment to the municipal code as quickly as possible, and assuming council adopts this forthwith, and you do the 30 days, I think before the end of the year, we should be operational.
That would be great. And of course, we'll make that request.
I would, though, in the abundance of caution, just ask UCLA for one more quarter, just because you may have to work out some of the permitting issues. If in some of those areas you're going to have cars that are going to need to park parallel, in certain.
I think there's virtually none of those. They're all virtually all parked the other way.
And just to correct a few things, you won't be able to, just because a car is necessarily parked in front of a block doesn't mean you may not be able to park in that particular block if that car is parked illegally. It's on where parking is prohibited on a block, you will not be able to have cars extending into the street.
Right. That would.
Yeah, for example, if your apron is within 15 feet of a fire hydrant,
right,
you can't park within 15 feet of a fire hydrant, period, by state law. So.
Right.
Or in this example, if this is street cleaning, on street cleaning days, if this, again, it's when and where it's allowed. So when it's not allowed, then this car sticking out is subject to a citation.
Right. And strangers are not going to be able to park in people's driveways. It's just, as 22507.2, are owners and lessees of the particular place, and I think you'd want to stay with that in terms of apron parking as well.
No, absolutely. So you wouldn't want to be able to just have some random person pull up and block your driveway and leave. So
Right.
that would be great.
Under 22500, it's sort of implied, because E doesn't allow parking in front of driveways on public or private, and I think when you look at 22507.2, it allows the homeowner or lessee to park in front of their driveway. I think the purpose of 22500 was to prevent that very situation from happening.
Oh, that's great. Well, again, I want to thank everybody involved, particularly with the department, for helping us address what otherwise would have been a crisis. So, thank you.
Mr. Box just brought up a question, too. Come up here real quickly, but the question that I'd like to know is, those who got tickets, how many were they, and did they all pay it, or are they some on appeal, or some? Where are you with that reality?
Yeah, we don't have that information with us. We can get that back to you.
Okay, because without being naive or stupid, because I can be both, is there any possibility, since people, in the spirit of themselves, had no idea that this was illegal, is there any way we can address that?
Mr. Nagel? If the council took action directing the department to, I guess...
They took action to suspend enforcement when you, on October 14th, when that date occurred. But prior to that, you had 80.53, which was a valid ordinance. Unfortunately, I know that people didn't like it, but that was what was on the books.
So I don't... So, Mike, are we allowed to... I guess the question is, can we refund the money? Is that the question?
Sure.
Essentially?
Or those who haven't paid, who doubled their ticket?
That's a discretionary issue for you.
Okay, so what we'll do is get us the information, come back, and we'll discuss it again.
Yeah, we'll get you that information this week.
Okay, Mr. Bob.
You mentioned strangers that can't park in the permitted space.
Correct.
But what about guests? But that's not
You were mentioning
prohibited.
that before, that if it was part of your situation.
So again, for the permit, the way it's currently, the law is written, it's for the owners or the lessees.
Yes.
So typically, in this case, the system is not set up that anybody could, again, enforcement won't know if you have a guest or not. So
That's our limitation, not a state law limitation.
Right.
We
And
can
also,
back to,
it addresses the situation that the woman mentioned in her objections. I mean, I think the fear of having anybody come in and park and somebody's going to say it's a guest, this at least restricts it so that we don't have overcrowding in those areas. I think you do.
Wouldn't this also give the opportunity, if you have a guest that's your guest, that you put your car there and put your guest in your spot?
Yes, we self-manage.
Avoiding it because you would much rather use it yourself, because you are able to do that.
I just want to clarify, it's not a restriction of state law, though. It's an elective limitation because of a system we've designed or implemented, and one that we've, because...
State law,
It's in state law.
7.2
State law said
only
doesn't-
allows owner or the lessee of the property.
Yes, that's it. That's what it says.
Yeah.
So it's a
Okay,
state
so
law.
what we do is, assuming we move forward as time goes on, that we make it very clear to the person who applies for that permit, that for their vehicle or their lessees, and if they have a guest coming, they just have to move their cars around so that guest is not in that spot. Because you can't predict who
We will,
the guest is, nobody will know.
our current plan is to disclose as much information on the application process on our website, and again, be upfront as far as we can on all the rules and regulations.
Oh, I would just move approval of this report.
So moved. Thank you. Thank you all so much, very much,
you.
for your comments. Thank you very much. Again, we really appreciate the department. Terrific. All right, is there any other items, anybody? Okay, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.